Hello and welcome to the special broadcast of No Spin, in which we attempt to decode the paradox of the Indian economy with two leading academics, both joining us from a global platform. Kaushik Basu, former Chief Economic Advisor and Professor of Economics at Cornell University, joining us from the New York area. And also from New York, Dr. Arvind Panagariya, Professor of Economics at Columbia University and former Vice Chairman of the Niti Aayog. Now, on one hand, the Indian economy seems to be on the ascendant, emerging from its COVID downturn, with news coming in that we're now the fifth largest economy in the world, crossing Great Britain. This just days after India posted record growth of 13.5% in the last financial quarter, the second highest ever. But is the rising tide lifting all boats? Jobs and incomes continue to be a worry. New jobs data shows unemployment in August at just over 8%, a 12-month high. As the economist Rathin Roy noted, India may be getting bigger, but not necessarily richer. Let's start first with Professor Kaushik Basu. Thank you very much indeed, Professor Basu, for joining us. What do you make of this? I mean, firstly, do you agree that there is an inherent paradox here, that you could be both getting headlines about India achieving some kind of global economic benchmark, but there is continued pressure on jobs and incomes? And if there is indeed a paradox, how do you explain it?
Yeah, it is, Basu, first of all, a pleasure to be on your show. It is not a paradox, really. The landmarks that we are hitting, especially the landmark of overtaking UK GDP, this is a very long-run process. And it makes a headline, but it is really nothing to celebrate. For one, this is a very long process. When you overtake a country's GDP, this is going on for the last 25 years. India is growing faster and catching up. Number two, population growth. India's population is still growing much faster than Britain's, close to double Britain's population growth. So in terms of GDP, the total income generated in the country, that we would overtake Britain someday was absolutely inevitable, if for nothing else. Just by population growth, we would overtake them because it's a larger population and it would be a bigger size. So I don't think that really should make news.
Okay.
The other question that you're raising, that the growth is picking up, that is indeed true. And there, however, there is no paradox. India's growth had been quite remarkable. From the year 2003 to 2011, it was a phenomenal growth phase. After that, and especially after 2016, it has been a steady decline. It's a very alarming decline from 2016 that has taken place. Now it is rising again. But let's just look at one thing. When you fall into a pit and then you get growth, the growth is that of climbing out of the pit. In fact, one of the world records of growth is China in 1964 grew by 18%. And the reason is, just before that, there had been the great famine of China, where growth had crashed. So the growth is just getting out of that. And that is what is happening now. Now, you should not interpret that excessively either way, that it means nothing or it means a lot. But the growth that you've seen just recently is the growth of getting out of the pit. And let me just put in one more word. If you flatten it out, take the 2 years or 3 years and take the average growth over the last 2 years plus bring in 22-23, India's annual growth rate is roughly 2.5% per annum, which is not the bottom of the world, nowhere near the top of the world. We are somewhere in the middle, and the reason for that is in the year 2020, India's growth was 142nd in the world. The plummeting was very deep, and now we are climbing out of it. Fingers crossed that we are going to do better. But indeed, what you're seeing is the flattening out and nothing more.
I see. Okay, interesting. So you're both, in a sense, unbundling and in some ways also trying to, dial down on the hype around the crossing the Great Britain, becoming fifth largest economy. And also you're talking about this recent, I'm coming to you, the recent growth spike, which you say is what economic gurus like you call the low base effect, that because in the last quarter we had a crash because of the pandemic, now it's looking quite high, this 13.5%, but overall, if you average it out, we're not really growing at that rapid a pace. But overall though, beyond these numbers and benchmarks, Dr. Basu, what do you make of the overall sense of what is happening to us? Are we overall doing reasonably well, as the government likes to suggest? They cite, of course, apart from the growth figures, they cite tax collections and other data to suggest that we are starting to claw our way out of the sort of the COVID downturn. We handled it quite well in terms of the interventions and so on, and by and large things are looking up. Or are there worries, particularly to do with jobs and income?
Yeah. Basu, there are deep worries. It is true that there are some indicators on which India is doing better. Non-performing assets of commercial banks, we have improved our position. Tax collection has improved. But if you look at the deeper indicators which affect ordinary people, we are not doing well at all. In fact, our performance has worsened in ways which it is very, very worrying. Youth unemployment, to me, is the biggest indicator. Even if India is growing, you do it however you calculate, flatten it out, India is growing. Not as fast as we used to grow 10 years ago, but India is growing. But bring in youth unemployment. India's youth unemployment stands now at roughly 28%. And I want to clarify to the ordinary reader, it does not mean 28% of youngsters are not working, which is fine. They may be college, they may be doing something else. But 28% of youngsters who want work are not finding work, which puts India in the category of the troubled Middle Eastern countries. So what is happening in India is, even as the growth clawback is happening, and I would not deny that at all, that is happening, it is not spreading across the population at all.
Okay.
And that is the worrying part, that for a large, even if population is growing and we are overtaking Britain, half of India, or maybe even greater than half of India, the bottom end, is probably losing out on per capita income. But one more thing I must point out,
yes,
Basu, you may want to come back to that later, is if you look at inflation, India's inflation is a very strange inflation which is not getting enough attention. And I'm not saying this, only reason I'm saying this is the government ought to pay much more attention to this to rectify. Our retail inflation, what is hitting you, me, and others, is roughly at 7% per annum. Bad, but not as bad as several other countries. India is somewhere in the middle in the global charts. But our wholesale inflation, where the little shopkeepers are buying their products, that is very, very high. It has been in double digits for 17 months, which means that the retail inflation is not that high, but your wholesale inflation is high. Small businesses are suffering greatly. And so small businesses, self-employed people, workers, farmers, that segment is suffering very badly.
So how would you?
The top end is doing well, giving India a positive growth.
Okay, but what would you then make of, because the government would say that, look, we have actually given many incentives for job creation, including the Make in India program, which is the sort of marquee manufacturing program of the country. How does one reconcile that with the fact that, as you say, there is still a chronic jobs problem?
Attention has to move away. The economy is a complex character, so you want to directly help workers, but you also want to support small businesses, because in the end, the employment is going to be the absorption that takes place by the small businesses. In India, the big problem is that the attention is going disproportionately to big businesses, which gives us global headlines. Okay. But the small businesses, the self-employed, are suffering. So the direct help to the workers is one segment of it, but a lot of it has to be to encourage the small businesses to come up. Also, one indicator on which India has done well, but we have to be a bit careful about it, ease of doing business, which, as you probably know, the World Bank ran into controversy and that has been stopped for a while. India has done well on the ease of doing business indicator. However, what India has done is it has gamed the system. You improve exactly those measures which the World Bank tracks.
Right.
So India does better. But the overall environment whereby small businesses do well, they want to employ people, the self-employed people do well, the farmers do well,
Right.
negligible.
Let me ask you, in conclusion of the segment with you, that, it's often said that these days all views tend to be seen through somewhat of a partisan lens. And in your case, I was looking at your tweets where you say if anyone gets credit for India's overtaking UK's GDP, it's Narasimha Rao and Manmohan Singh's governments. These are, of course, Congress governments. You also tweeted in support or in a sense in solidarity with the Bharat Jodo Yatra that Rahul Gandhi is taking out. To the argument that your views might be shaped perhaps by this kind of, whatever you want to call it, political or other leaning, you would say what?
So that is a human side. Your political leanings do affect you. But as an economist, I try to be as objective as possible. And there are many indicators on which I agree that the government has done well. But when I give the credit for India overtaking UK to way before this government, this is a completely non-controversial matter. This is a headline grabbing that you say when in a relay race, after 20 people have run, the last person who does the crossing over gets all the credit. It's shocking. It's population growth along with, and not just Narasimha Rao, Manmohan Singh, even the Vajpayee regime, we were beginning to do better. All that has accumulated. It's absolutely ridiculous to treat the overtaking of Britain as something that has just jumped up and been done. And the other thing that I do want to emphasize is I agree that there are indicators on which we have done well, but the politics, for me, is what is beneath the surface damaging India. This is very hard to quantify, but there are laboratory tests done in Israel on which we have data that groups that have trust and function together begin to flourish. I feel India's political polarization, the increasing hate, and I'm not putting the blame on anyone's doorstep, but this is contributing to the economic malfunction, which means the mass of India is doing poorly. Only a small segment at the top is doing well. And this largely has to do with politics, and it will be a failure of duty as a thinker, as an academic, not to point out that the polarized politics and hate is hurting India.
Okay, interesting. We'll have you back for a conversation on that as well at some point. But thank you so much, Professor Basu, for joining us. Let me go straight across to Dr. Panagariya, waiting patiently and listening in. Thank you so much, Dr. Panagariya. I'm sure you would want to respond to many of the things we heard, and also, of course, your own independent views. But let me just start, Dr. Panagariya, with that first point about, which was in a sense the big headline of last week of India's crossing this benchmark, becoming fifth largest economy. What would you make of Professor Basu's point that it's not fair to center that credit around the present government, around the Narendra Modi regime, given that, as he said, this is a relay race, and he actually attributes the real sort of, triggers for this to earlier Congress regimes of Narasimha Rao and Dr. Manmohan Singh?
So, yes, I've been hearing Mr. Srinivasan, Mr. Basu, and I do not know where to begin really.
Let's begin with the fifth largest point, and then we can.
I'll come to that. But if you ever want the description of a very, very sunny day as stormy and dark evening with clouds all over, you can give call to Professor Basu. That's how I see how he described everything, including his views being completely academic and nothing to do with politics. I'm astounded. Normally I don't use such strong language, but today really he has provoked me.
Okay.
Let me come to his point. There's no doubt this is a relay race, but at the same time, let us not forget. Go back to 2008. We were 12th largest.
Right.
So it's not like you have climbed up from 12th to 5th. So somewhere it has happened, not over a 75-year period. Before Narasimha Rao came, we had almost, 45 years of debacle in economic growth. Countries like South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, then China, they all bypassed us one after another. So let's not forget what we got delivered. Narasimha Rao, full credit. Manmohan Singh as finance minister, full credit.
Right.
Atal Bihari Vajpayee, full credit. Manmohan Singh as prime minister, zero credit. I have asked this to Monte Carlo Walia, I have asked to Kaushik Basu. Name 3 economic reforms that the Manmohan Singh government did, which they think led to the kind of growth that we experienced in UPA 1.
Okay.
In 2003-4, under Vajpayee, growth had already hit 8%.
What was their response?
Hit 8%.
What was their response when you asked them?
No, there was no response. That's the point. There is no response. They all quickly, hide behind the high growth numbers. But what did their government do to cause that growth? Now, 2003-4, the economy had already reached 8%. Now, do you think in 2004-5, the Manmohan Singh government did something which led to another year of 9% growth, and then in 5-6, another year of 8% growth? I mean,
so you're saying
this was really
right.
being built up.
So
on the reforms that were done by Vajpayee and
all right. Okay, Dr. Panagriya, fair enough. So you're saying that in a sense the quote-unquote miracle growth years of UPA 1 were buffeted by the sort of boost they got from the NDA 1 government.
Right.
But just coming back to... Okay.
Yeah.
But just coming back to...
Just half minute.
Okay.
Just half minute. In fact, UPA 2 committed so many sins.
Right.
Kaushik keeps talking about this, decline in the growth rate since 2016-17. He forgets. I mean, you can have rising growth rates. In their last 3 years, UPA 2 last 3 years, you had rising growth rates. What were those growth rates? Well, those growth rates were 5.2%, 5.5%, 6.4%. You can have rising growth rates, but very low.
Okay.
Is that what you want?
But all right. But coming to the point that you were making about the, hitting the 5th largest benchmark, which you said, you can't just take away from the fact that we were at a much lower index just, not that long ago. But the wider argument being made, and not just by him, that this is just partly a function of India's sheer volume. And if you look at it in terms of per capita, which is you average it out to how much a citizen earns as a proportion of GDP, India is the poorest country in the G20. It's right at the bottom. It's at, about $2,500. The next highest, Indonesia, is 4,700, almost double of India. So in that sense, this points that we may be large in size, but we are essentially a very poor country.
Look, Mr. Srinivasan, we were large also in 1990s, but we are not the 5th largest. So let us not, just because we still remain below Indonesia, because Indonesia in the 1980s carried out major reforms. We were asleep on the wheel at the time. So let's not do that kind of comparison. We can all choose our, starting points or ending points to give the picture, but let's not take away the fact that in the last about 16, 17 years, we have grown actually quite rapidly. We have just not been able to make up for all the sins we committed for a half century. Right. I think, it took massive reforms, and then also because of the socialist mindset that got created among the political class, among the bureaucrats, among the entrepreneurs, actually, the change itself has been slower. I mean, why has it been 30 years? Labor law reforms, we are still implementing them.
That's what I wanted to ask you.
And a lot of these things were known. 15 years ago, I wrote about the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code Act, right. Exactly. State-of-the-art bankruptcy law. It didn't happen. I mean, 10 years of UPA went by. Nothing happened.
Okay. But that's the thing I wanted to ask you about, Dr. Panagariya, that while, we are seeing, as I said, in certain indices and certain benchmarks that there is this growth, this worry, particularly, I mean, there's so many aspects to unpack, but because time is short, if one looks largely at jobs and income, which is, something that comes up most often, why does that continue to remain a problem. We can, of course, look at the latest CMI data about 8.3% unemployment in August, but we don't necessarily have to just go by that. There are several indicators which indicate that there is this pressure of job creation. Why have we faltered on that?
No, I completely disagree actually with the numbers, because the CMI data, we can all do our own surveys and create numbers, you know.
That's why I said
to
we
me,
don't
to
have
me,
to be,
to me
we don't have to
CMI
be
data,
fixed on
look,
that.
look, I want to rely on the most reliable numbers.
Okay.
Numbers that I trust, at least you may not. The numbers I trust is the periodic labor force survey.
Okay.
That is done by the MOSPI. And it has a very good track record. You know, it started in 17-18 and it has been doing very well. Look at all those numbers. None of these unemployment rates. In fact, for the latest quarter for which it puts out, you know, quarterly it puts out only urban unemployment data. And the unemployment rate for the latest quarter, which is the April, May, June quarter, has been the lowest that it has recorded ever since 17-18 that it started doing it, 7.6% by the current weekly status. Now, current weekly status always gives you higher rates than the usual status. And 7.6 has never been recorded since 17-18 that the PLFS actually started doing the data. If I look at the EPFO data, now EPFO data is not a record of employment, but it certainly is a record of organized sector employment, at least some, in a sense, that how much we are formalizing the labor force. In the last year, 21-22,
yes,
you have added some 12.3 million people to the EPFO roles.
Okay.
Now, these people were, you know, this is not an net addition to employment. There's certainly people coming to the formalized employment.
That's right. They may already be employed, but they might be getting enrolled. Okay.
And this 12.3 million is unprecedented. It was, you know, year before that was 7.7 million, year before that 7.9 million. So very strong numbers.
Okay.
Now, also investment. Look, also investment.
Yes.
Where do we stand? For the first time in a long time, investment as a proportion of the GDP, 34.7%. I think, you know, this is unprecedented, almost getting to 35%. The peak we had was in 7-8, which was around 37% or so. So we are almost getting there.
Okay, let me ask you as in conclusion, the same question I asked Dr. Basu, that just as there could be questions raised about his views and whether that is filtered through the politically partisan lens, could that be also be said about you? I mean, quite apart from the fact that you served in the Niti Aayog under the Modi government, just looking at your tweets again, you know, about praising the Prime Minister for the handling of the COVID pandemic and so on and so forth. This is even after you've gone back to your academic life. To that you would say what?
No. I am, in fact, unlike Mr. Kaushik Basu, I am independent because I also criticize the government when they make mistakes.
Okay. For example?
I have steadfastly written critically about the protectionism of the Modi government.
Okay.
I've also criticized the Modi government for being slow in cleaning up the bank NPAs.
Right.
So where mistakes are made, I do criticize them because, you know, nobody will take you seriously if you only do the praise and leave the criticisms out. But by and large, I think, COVID, barring the Delta wave, I think, you know, somebody did drop the ball during the Delta wave. There was a 3-month period and all. But barring that, I think the handling of COVID by this government was absolutely superb, exemplary. 2 billion jabs in such a short time period. It's an amazement, actually, you know, and also the smoothness with which it was done. Also the fiscal the way it was handled, I think, you know, there's a lot of positives to be said.
Okay. At some point we'll get you back on COVID and handling or mishandling, but thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Panagariya. Fascinating as always. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.